Hi everyone, and welcome to Insight. Today I'm going to be doing a vlog on a very interesting portrait photographer that I discovered a while back by the name of Philippe Halsman. Now, Halsman is a very eccentric photographer, and to be honest with you, I wasn't sure what to think about him when I first discovered him. He's relatively new to me. I mean, I've heard about him, but I didn't know much about him. So when I started doing research on him, I discovered that I really enjoy his aesthetic and his images and his philosophical sort of motivations. So stay tuned and I will take you on a bit of a trip with Philippe Halsman. Okay, so welcome back. Let me just begin by saying that Halsman is basically a portrait photographer. Most of his images are portraits, but they're portraits with a twist in that many of his images have a humorous undercurrent to them. They are somewhat surreal and kind of play with our expectations. In essence, his images replace the conventional and the expected with something absurd and unexpected. And this really is where his images get their strength, okay? They really play with what we expect to see. So let me tell you a little bit about his background. Halsman was born in Riga, which is the largest city in Latvia, and he didn't even study photography. He studied electrical engineering, but he wasn't really interested in that, and he never really practiced electrical engineering. He was much more interested in photography, and as a young photographer, he contributed to fashion magazines such as Vogue, and he became very well known and basically gained a reputation for being an extraordinary portrait photographer. That's where he really was strong. Now, this was in the late 1930s, and when France was invaded by Germany at the beginning of World War II, Halsman didn't want to stay there. He wanted to go to the States, somewhere safe, and he was able to get a visa to the U.S. with the help of a family friend, Albert Einstein. And Albert Einstein remained friends with Halsman for many, many years. And in fact, later on, Halsman would photograph Einstein. And he, in fact, took one of the most iconic photographs of Einstein. And, this is a photograph that a lot of us have seen, but probably didn't associate Halsman with the image. Anyway, once Halsman got into to the United States, he began doing product photography, and he worked with the cosmetics firm Elizabeth Arden for a time. But then in 1942, he got a job with Life magazine, and there he began to do a lot of portraits. So, as I mentioned earlier, and as you probably noticed in the images that I've been putting up, Halsman's images have a touch of the surreal. They play with reality. They kind of touch on the unexpected. And part of the reason for this is because he was influenced by the famous surrealist painter Salvador Dali. In fact, Salvador Dali and Halsman were very good friends. Halsman was a great photographer. He wasn't interested in painting. Dali was a painter, wasn't really interested that much in photography, but they collaborated to create painterly photographs, surreal painterly photographs that, have really a lot, that borrow a lot from the aesthetic of Salvador Dali. So Dali was a major influence on Halsman. So Halsman met Dali in 1941, and as I said, they collaborated on quite a few projects. And one of the most famous images that the two created together was produced in 1948, and it was called Dali Atomicus. At the heart of this photograph is the idea of suspension. The photograph basically depicts 3 flying cats, a bucket of thrown water, and Dali in midair. The title of the photograph is a reference to Dali's work, Leda Atomica, which can be seen to the right behind the 2 cats. So apparently it took 26 attempts before the two actually got a satisfactory result. And one of the things that's really interesting about this photograph is that everything is tack sharp. The water, the cats, there's no blurriness at all. And, they had to have a very, a very specific lighting setup to get that kind of result. It probably was not very easy to do at all. And they did try 26 times to get the right composition, because everything had to be in midair when the photograph was taken. Anyway, this is a, again, iconic photograph produced by Halsman. And Halsman and Dali, worked together, and eventually they released a compendium of their collaboration in 1954. And the book was called Dali's Mustache. And it features 36 different views of the artist's mustache. Another very famous collaboration between the two was the surrealistic portrait named Voluptas Mors. This is basically an image, a photograph of Dali sitting beside a large skull composed of 7 nudes. There's an interesting story behind this photograph, because later on it was used for the poster of the Silence of the Lamb film. So if you take a look closely, you can see the photograph in the poster. And it's a subtle use of the image, but it's a very interesting use. And it was also used in other posters apparently as well. So the two of them collaborated quite a bit, and they really put together some very interesting photographs. In 1951, Halsman was commissioned by NBC to photograph popular comedians of the time, including Milton Berle, Sid Caesar, Groucho Marx, Bob Hope. And it was at this time that Halsman developed one of the most interesting concepts that he used in many of his later photographs as well. So while photographing the comedians, at the end of the session, he basically asked each one of them to jump in the air, and he would photograph them mid-air. And later on, this inspired Halsman to actually take pictures of many celebrities jumping and capturing their jump mid-air, including the Duke and Duchess of Windsor, Marilyn Monroe, Richard Nixon. And when asked why he did this, this is what he says exactly in his own words. When you ask a person to jump, his attention is mostly directed toward the act of jumping, and the mask falls so that the real person appears. So this jump photography basically became a bit of a philosophy for him, and he called this philosophy Jumpology, and he had many, many, many images and exhibitions of people jumping. Halsman also had a number of rules for taking effective and interesting photographs. These rules can be found in a book that he wrote called Halsman and the Creation of Photographic Ideas. And there are 6 basic rules. The first one is the rule of direct approach. And this rule basically says, when you take a photograph, be straightforward and plain. Being straightforward and plain creates a strong photograph. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be playful, or that you shouldn't create something interesting in a photograph. But what he means by being plain and straightforward is that once you decide what you're going to put in front of the camera, take the picture. Don't over manipulate, and certainly when you have taken the picture, don't over process the image afterwards. The second rule is the rule of the unusual technique, and this rule basically says, you need to find interesting techniques when you take a photograph. Don't be conventional. So what this means is, use unusual lighting, use an unusual angle, an unusual composition. Don't be ordinary. Try to create an image in an extraordinary way. Undermine people's expectations. The third rule is the rule of the added unusual feature. And I really think this is a really interesting rule, and I think that one that works really well. So in this rule, he basically says you need to introduce something that is unexpected, an unexpected prop, something that the audience isn't really going to expect in the photograph. And a good example of this is the photograph by Diane Arbus, where she has a boy holding a hand grenade. So without the hand grenade, it would be an okay photograph. But the hand grenade is so unexpected in this context that it really makes the image, and it keeps us looking at the image. It's such a weird juxtaposition of this innocent-looking boy with a hand grenade. So this unexpected feature or prop really makes the image. The next rule is the rule of the missing feature. And this rule basically says, stimulate the viewer by going against his or her expectations. Don't just give us something that's boring and ordinary and expected. Play with our expectations. The next rule is the rule of the compounded features. And basically this is a rule which says, take all the rules that have, been used previously and put them together in one image. Take multiple rules and combine them in one image to make the image even stronger. The final rule is the rule of the literal or ideographic method. And this rule basically is the rule that your photograph needs to have some sort of an underlying message, figure out what your message is, and then whatever is the subject of your photograph, try to get under the skin of that subject. Portray the subject as clearly as possible, discover the essence of the subject, and then, show us the essence in the photograph. Anyway, that is a brief outline of Philippe Halsman's philosophy and photography. If you like this video, please subscribe. Actually, subscribe even if you don't like the video. And I'll see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.